We start tonight's program with our good friend. He is chairman of Bowyer Research and Forbes contributor, Jerry Bowyer. Welcome back, Jerry.
Who couldn't like Crane Durham? What Scrooge? What bitter individual would not who's out there would not like Crane Durham?
Yeah, there seems to be a long list at times, but hey, Jerry, one thing I noticed, I'm not going to play the clip for you, but I do want to reference it. Shinseki resigning today talked about integrity.
Yes.
And a failure of character.
Yes.
And now we're shifting here, but we're really not shifting because our economy shrunk, contracted. I want you to explain to us what that means first.
Yeah.
And then I want to understand what we are missing, and you've talked about this, what we are missing as conservatives, but before we're conservatives, we're Christians.
Right.
And what we're missing. Senator Tim Scott touched on what we are missing. Why don't we begin with that clip? Roll it.
I have to craft legislation consistent with the Word of God, but that reflects a national perspective, regardless of whether they understand Galatians 6:7 and 6:9. Anybody follow me? Come on. So when I talk about the fact that education is a powerful weapon towards the American dream, I think about the necessity of delayed gratification. And so what I want to do is make sure that parents have an opportunity to choose the path of education for their kids. So I believe in school choice. If we are going to have a way to make sure that our kids are properly educated, including a biblical worldview, we should be able to use our resources that go to the government in a way that best suits the American dream. And the foundation of the American dream is the Judeo-Christian foundation.
Well, he has obviously been listening to our interviews.
Or we and he are listening to the same person.
Exactly. Now, why don't we begin with, first off, what he spoke to in Galatians 6:7 through 6:9.
Well, right. The idea is that it's something you and I have talked about before, that national character and behavior is the ultimate driver of risk levels for an economy or for a culture. That what you do now affects what happens eventually, right? That what you sow, eventually you reap. And it's interesting, just looking at what the stock market's been doing, this year with easy money pouring into the economy. Everyone's fine. Everything's great. Everyone's content because the Dow Jones Industrial Average went up. Not understanding that the relationship between reaping and sowing involves a time offset. So the way the Bible describes, God's providence and justice, it puts a strong emphasis on patience. It puts a strong emphasis on taking a long-term perspective, which is not the way that people naturally think. Look, when we're children and we do something bad, and if our parents love us, they punish us for it right away. And if we do something good, our parents reward us for it right away. Because that's how it is with children. Children don't have a long-term perspective by their very nature. Babies don't, toddlers don't. As you grow older and older, you have a longer and longer-term perspective. You can remember the connection between your behavior and the results. We are expected, as adult human beings, to be able to think ahead and to be able to say, just because everything seems okay just now, of course it really isn't okay if you're one of the massive number of people who have been pushed out of the workforce. But let's say you have a job and you have some money in the stock market and you're saying everything's fine because the stock market's going up. You don't understand that an adult way of looking at the world is to look at behavior in terms of the long-term effect of that behavior, reaping and sowing. That's what the book of Galatians is about. The whole nation, the nation of Israel, reaped badly and was about to sow very badly. And the Judaizers in the church who were bringing the mistakes that had crept into Judaism, not inherent to Judaism. Judaism was the biblical religion, but the mistakes that had crept in, national pride, legalism, and all the rest of it, was destroying the lives of some people and destroying some churches. So what we have to do as Christians who are citizens and also people who are economic actors, investors, or whatever else, is to get that for a time the wicked can prosper, but it's only for a time. And that in the end, the highest risk thing you can do is to disobey the covenant with God, to disobey God's commandments, to violate his principles. That over time, look, some wicked people die peacefully in their beds. I understand that, but that's not the normal course of things. The normal course of things is that nations and individuals who act foolishly, they do not reap it right away, but there's a strong probability that they will reap what they've sown eventually. And so we as Christians, faith is partly, I believe that someday God will save me. His faith is the belief, Paul says, the belief in things not seen. But it also, part of faith, this is the part we don't talk about, part of faith is the belief that justice will be done on the enemies of God who wage war against him, that just like the people of God will be vindicated, it will be demonstrated in a way that all can see that the people who are at war with God, at war with the Scriptures, and at war with his people, that they also will be, what their principles will also be unvindicated by subsequent events. That's part of the redemption of God's people. We want to just talk about the nice stuff. The nice stuff is, good stuff is going to happen to people who believe in Jesus and follow him. But part of the vindication is also seeing the corrupt nations and corrupt institutions fall.
As we see the religion of government, statism, and what they have been sowing for, arguably, we can go back and we can go the last 40, 50 years. Certainly we see a cultural shift. Tell me, is that reflected in not only the economy, but also what we're seeing at the VA with the lack of integrity? And is it front and center because government has become so prominent in our lives because it's grown so big?
What I would say is that the culture shifts and then the government shifts, not the other way around. So we underwent a cultural shift that really goes back to the beginnings of the 20th century. Two things happened. The mainline Christian denominations essentially began to believe a different religion, but they still called it Christianity. Gresham Machen wrote a book about this called Christianity and Liberalism. And he argued that liberalism, that is sort of the mainline Protestant belief that the gospel is just about socialism and social uplift, and that Jesus really wasn't born of a virgin, and he really didn't resurrect from the dead, and the Red Sea didn't part, and all the rest of it. The apostasy of the mainline denominations, and then so we all know that was a bad thing, but something else happened among the evangelicals that was equally damaging. In fact, I would argue even more damaging. The evangelicals said, because those mainline people want to change the world, they want to reform economics, and they want to reform government, and they want to reform the culture, and they're the bad guys, then all we want to do is share the gospel. All we want to do is get people individually saved and maybe have a good family life. But we do not want to change the world. The world's going to end very soon. While this Mussolini fellow, clearly he's the Antichrist. And so history's not going to last much longer anyway. You don't polish the brass on a sinking ship. And so we're going to withdraw from all the social institutions because only the liberals are the people who care about economics and politics. And the only thing we're about is we've got to get you saved. And once you're saved, you don't go to movies, you don't play cards, you don't drink any alcohol, you don't smoke, and that's the gospel. There it is. That's the gospel. You get saved and you don't do any of those things. So the withdrawal of people who are faithful to the Bible, partly faithful to the Bible, and that they believed it was inerrant from society, and then the handing over of religious leadership to mainline Protestantism, which then degenerates into just liberalism and secularism and atheism. Those are the spiritual shifts that cause the cultural shift, and then something fills the vacuum. Once God has been dethroned in our hearts, just like this is exactly what Samuel warned Israel about. They said, we want a king like the other nations, and Samuel said, God is your king. You have a king. Well, we want a king like the other nations, and God said, tell them that they can have a king like the other nations, and what's he going to do? He's going to take 10% of your income in the form of a tax. By the way, our top tax rate is 40%. And he's going to conscript your people into the armies. He's going to basically put you to forced labor. He's going to take your daughters to be, his bakers, and wink, wink, when kings take your daughters, it's not just for baking. And then you're going to cry out. You're going to realize that you made the wrong decision. We're recapitulating that. We had a spiritual shift and a cultural shift and then a political shift. And now we feel like serfs because some of us are giving 40% of our income to the government. And the government is saying, okay, I know we're taking a lot of money, but we're going to take care of you, so it's worth it. But then we look at the VA and we say, really, you're taking care of us? Because these are the best of us. This is the best of us, the veterans. The people who put their lives on the line for the good of the country. These are the best citizens. And this is how you take care of them. So this is your mercy, this is your compassion. Solomon said the compassion of the wicked is cruel. So if this is how you take care of veterans who are highly honorable people and esteemed by our nation, not as much as they should be, but highly esteemed by our nation, what's going to happen when the whole system is run by the same kind of people? It'll be even less effective and efficient than the VA because it'll be a larger bureaucracy. So we don't trust your compassion. So people are waking up to the fact that the savior state is a liar. It will take your money, but it will not take care of you. It will take care of itself because that's what it was set up for in the first place. All that stuff about taking care of us, that was a lie. What they're really about is taking care of themselves. And that's what they're doing. They're taking care of themselves. So the government workers, other than Shinseki, who's losing their job over this? Other than someone who's at that political appointee level. I mean, why isn't the staff of the VA being laid off en masse? Well, civil service, they can't be. They're a permanent ruling class. So the people who actually, messed this up, they're immune from it. They'll still get the tax dollars. We'll still pay them. We will still give them money in exchange for compassion, and we will still get cruelty instead of compassion until we shift back to a God-centered world, to a healthy culture, and dethrone the state and turn it back into a servant rather than a master.
Final question only because of time. Can we have a successful reform without leaders mentioning a biblical foundation and a biblical answer specifically to the problems that we have?
We can't have financial reform, even if they mention it but don't believe it. We cannot have genuine economic and financial reform without God. We just can't. We can't do it with secular conservatism. We tried. Reagan was the most gifted communicator of my generation, and he was a brilliant man and a very decent man. What could have been done with politics, he did. That's the limit of it. Until there is revival, and by revival I mean real revival. I don't just mean people running around and yelling and having a religious experience, but genuine change deep inside that flows out into every bit of life. Until we have revival and reform, then we will not be able to reform these institutions. We will continue to have crisis after crisis after crisis, VA, and then who knows what, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, because this isn't a problem of just the character of the people running things. It's the problem of the character of us as a people. And until God is back in the center, we won't be prospered. And that's precisely the point. That's why he allows this to happen, because he knows it won't work without him.
Jerry Bowyer, chairman of Bowyer Research and Forbes contributor, your latest article on the Elliot Rodger murders. I'd like to post it on the Facebook following the broadcast. That's okay with you?
Yeah,
God bless you, man. It's great to talk with you. I just wish I had more time. Thank you so much.
Too. God bless you. Love you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
I do. Colonel Kukulu next. Rain Durham's Nothing But Truth. AFR Talk.